Hi, I'm Allie Reynolds with Allie's Organics, and I want to give you some fertilizer tips. One thing about fertilizer is your plants need a steady supply of fertilizer to keep them productive through the growing season. Some of the best things to do first before you fertilize is to get your soil tested. That way you know what your soil is going to need. So that would be the first step that you do. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the last number is potassium or potash. The first number, nitrogen, does your leafy greens. The second number, phosphorus, feeds the root systems and the flowering. Your third number, your potash or potassium, is the overall health of the plant. There's several different choices of fertilizer depending on what you need. This green sand is strictly potash. It is a 003. Then you have something that's high in phosphorus, like this fish bone meal. The number is 16. This is good for things like root crops, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, because it feeds the fruit and not too much nitrogen in it. Not that you don't need some phosphorus. Then there's things that are just like an all-purpose, which is, this was a 462. This is called a well-balanced fertilizer. For if you don't want to get into this other stuff, you could just simply apply this for the beginning gardener. It's a good way to go. Then, one of my favorite all-time fertilizers is Kelp Meal, because it's just good for the overall plant. It helps with stress, it has a little bit of fertilizer in it, and a good source of potash in it. We don't want to just apply fertilizer just in random amounts. Make sure that you follow the instructions on the back. Typically, organic fertilizers are 5 pounds per 100 square foot, but you always want to read your labels first so that you don't overdo. It's better to underdo than to overdo, because sometimes you can cause worse problems over fertilizing than you can not fertilizing at all. Now, there's some other things that you can do for fertilizing if you don't like to use a granular form. Granular forms, you actually have to sprinkle in and work into the surface a little bit so it's absorbed better. But if you pick something like an all-purpose fertilizer, you can just simply mix it into a watering can or a spritzer and pour it right over the top of your plant, and that would be called foliar feeding. So the plant gets it instant. It starts to feed it immediately. So if you've got a plant that needs some help, this is a good way to go. One thing that you don't want to do is fertilize with chemical fertilizer, because if you fertilize with chemical fertilizer, what you're doing is you're breaking down your soil, killing off the good organisms, and you don't want to do that. You want to build up the good organisms. You don't want to be killing off the worms and the good bacteria and the good fungus that's actually in your soil. So you want to build it up and instead of breaking it down. Okay, I'm going to give you an example on how to use this organic fertilizer. Usually it's pretty coarse like this. It doesn't look like your typical synthetic fertilizer. Now there's a couple ways you could do it. You can just sprinkle it over the surface. And this is just an all-purpose. It's high in phosphorus, so it's good for these sweet potatoes. And then just simply take a little rake and just rake it in. And that's good enough. Another thing that you could actually do with tomatoes or each individual plant, just build a little furrow around each plant about 6 inches away from the trunk. This is really good for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And then just sprinkle a couple of tablespoons around this with just your ring, and then cover it up. That way you're just going directly towards each plant rather than doing the whole garden area. This will just improve the health of the tomato plants or pepper plants like these over the next few weeks, because organic fertilizer is slow release, so it takes a little bit longer. Your plants a lot of times will tell you what they need. If they look like they're not growing very much, then it's probably time to apply your fertilizer. But like I said before, don't overdo it. You're better to wait for the plant to tell you what to do. And I usually do mine on a schedule, but sometimes I forget, and then my plant will tell me it's not growing, it needs to be fertilized, especially in our high temperatures. When you live in an area where you have high heat, you're watering more often, and so your fertilizer is being leached out more, so you fertilize more often. But if you live in an area where it's cool temperatures, you won't have to fertilize near as much. Make sure you follow the instructions on the boxes, get a soil test, and if you use these tips, it'll help you have a healthy, productive garden.